Friday Heaters, the podcast. Today, we are joined by the one and only Emma Webster, partner of Friday Heaters, aka me. Today, we got her on the pod because she's got an upcoming show in New York City with Petzel. It'll be her first big New York debut, big space. We're going to talk about the process and road leading up to the show, get into her practice. As many of you know, a lot of what she does revolves around painting, working with digital tools, digital world. We're going to dig into it all and finally, hopefully, bring full clarity and story to exactly how that all goes down, because she's locked in the house here with us. She can't escape. We don't have to fit this. So here we go. Friday Heaters. Let's heat it up. Emma Webster, thank you for joining us on the Friday Heaters podcast today. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. Big fan.
Yeah. So I've heard. We know each other. I thought, just to break the ice, Emma, let's start today. I want to talk about vanity plates. That specifically car license plate vanity plates. You happen to have a vanity plate on your car.
Yeah.
And I believe it's spelled Pntress. That's Paintress. Can you tell me what went into that decision and where you're at on that in your life, and as you reflect on...
Are you asking me if I regret it?
No, I'm just like, tell us about the choice to like put that on your car. Paintress is kind of a bold statement on your car.
Yeah.
And how you're feeling about it today versus when you first made that choice.
Not quite the same regret as a tattoo, but like maybe a little self-conscious about it. I get a lot of like princess Pinterest. No one really knows it, but I do like the word paintress because obviously it brings gender into the equation. And, you have actor, actress, host, hostess. And there's something interesting to me that we always use painter and not paintress. And I
wonder, does anyone know like why that is? Have you been aware of like any discussion of paintress not being included in the...
It's a word in the dictionary. It's just...
Is it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a real word. People just don't use it.
Wow,
it's
you heard it here first, Friday Heaters. I did not know that.
Paintress is a word, yeah.
This is literally the first time I've like thought and realized it's an actual real word.
I know. It sounds like fantastical. It sounds
Not
like
bad.
dragoness or something, but no. Paintress.
Yeah. Okay, that actually feels more appropriate on your...
It's a little
plate.
On the nose.
Well, yeah, it's on the nose.
I think I could have done something more creative as an artist, but whatever. It is what it is.
When I met you roughly 5 years ago, you were driving an absolutely scorched Toyota Prius.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those things where it was like had been sun-baked enough that the paint it's not chipping off, but it's like
peeling.
It's like literally burned the color off of the hood and the roof. And then you upgraded to a new car. You got a convertible, BMW convertible, used. So, fiscally responsible. Yeah, sensibility. But you were on the come up. I feel like your career had started to take a turn. Mm-hmm. And I remember when you shared the car that you had gotten, you were a little sheepish about it. And I remember getting after you and saying like, oh, don't feel ashamed of anything or embarrassed about anything. Like, you earned it and you've had some success, and it's, a very thoughtful car that you were excited about. Do you think it's something like, as an artist, you're betraying sort of the artist storyline of like giving up the scorched Prius for a better car? And like, were you embarrassed about it at the time?
Yes, but I was also embarrassed by that Prius. that Smurf Prius that smelled like kombucha in the gym and had seen so much life. Yeah, I don't feel the same worry about selling out. I think that's this kind of 90s nihilism or something of like, to have any success means that you've sold your soul, or that you're not a good person, or you don't have creative integrity. And I don't think that's true. I think that there's such joy when people get to do what they want, express themselves, to not be afraid. I come from a family that's like very responsible and always told me never to make any big purchases. You know, you should never spend more than $100 on a pair of sneakers. And so making that kind of decision felt very adult. It felt like I was coming up with the rules.
Like independent, like kind of your, maybe not first, but like a major move of independence.
Yeah, and it was a thing that I wanted. I always wanted a convertible, and everyone told me, don't get a convertible, you'll never put the top down. And like, not true. LA's the perfect
I can
place.
confirm that is not true. That's in fact, you drive with the top down quite a lot.
Yeah, at night. Oh, it's so nice. The seat warmers. And
Do you ever feel, we go back and forth on this, do you ever feel like when I'm in a convertible, I just feel so exposed, like everyone's looking at me, and I kind of hate it in some ways, but you
try
do not
being
suffer
an
from
artist
that.
in 2026. Like, that is just, I've given up the idea of having a personal life or a private life. You know, so much of it is about sharing your vulnerabilities as a way to bridge with other people. Like, there is no privacy anymore.
That's fair. Okay. But driving your car, do you, how do I want to put it?
Do you feel like that bitch?
No, but I like being in the world. I think that there's this real reminder when there is no roof that you are of this world, that there is no sort of separation between you and the things around you. You can hear, you can see the lights affecting you. We don't really see all the liveliness of the world in general. And that's like my whole thing in art too, and not seeing the natural world, not seeing trees, not seeing this animism all around us. And so maybe it's a bit of a stretch to go from convertible to, you know, all things have souls or consciousness, but I do think that you're in the mix. You're literally in the mix.
Do people yell at you, or do you get more interactions being in a convertible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get a lot of like, is that your dad's car?
Is this Pinterest on the
well, yeah, or Princess or Pinterest or whatever they think it is. I don't know.
Knowing your dad, that would
also not work.
That would probably not work. He's a car guy, but
yeah, he is.
I think we probably need to cover a little bit of your process before we get going too much further. For the record, and I want this to be known, I feel like I have heard you talk about your process to a lot of people. And I oftentimes feel like you shortchange people and want to like simplify or say that it's not that big a deal or just talk about like one part of it. We're on my turf today on our Heaters podcast, so we control the narrative to some degree. Do you want to give a stab at talking about your process and have me fill in the things I feel like you don't cover, or do you want me to do it?
Though I would be interested in hearing your summary, something tells me you'd rather the first option. So
maybe. Why don't we just? You talk about your process a lot. People are kind of familiar with it, but why don't we hear officially? We got lots of time.
I think we need a lot of time.
Full
because
runway
it's
podcast.
It's elaborate. It goes on, and it's not something that I like knew, and I have to follow this sort of protocol. It definitely is morphing and adapting. But it starts where I'll look at the landscape around me, or often look at art history books and like see tropes that I see in landscape painting and think to myself, okay, how can I sort of change that? Like, what would it be like if we weren't at human scale? What would it be like if you could paint a landscape with two suns? And so you kind of have these like sci-fi hypotheticals going. And from there, I'll start sketching, just cobbling together either sketches of trees or animals, sometimes things that I've actually gone out and like sketched. Some are from photographs. But I basically start building this like nest of little objects and things, and it moves into sculpture. So then I'll literally make maquettes out of clay or paper mache. I'll, glue strange things together, whether it's bits of tape or yarn, and then I'll scan them. And that's kind of the big leap in the process these last couple of years, has been that I'm bringing this sort of handmade sculptures into the computer. And once I bring the process into the computer, then I've got my VR headset on and I'm modifying the scans, or I'm sculpting fresh new sculptures with an Oculus with Medium. But it's very much like building, it's almost like The Sims or something. I set up a diorama in Blender and then start bringing in all of these little aspects and try to compose this, what I'm hoping is a kind of symphonic scene where you have lots of characters, players, lighting conditions, actions, pause, in a way that riffs off of an expectation of landscape, but inevitably kind of goes off the rails a little.
Summarizing that, when you say sketches, most of us think at the start sketching with a pencil on paper or charcoal or paint. Is that how you would describe sketching?
Yeah, I mean, I really like to use ink.
Okay.
That's kind of one of the fastest ways. I come from drawing. Drawing was like my first love, and as you go through school, they turn you into a painter, but I feel like that it's just the fastest way of me coming up structurally with an idea. And then color is usually something that's left for painting, that light.
Okay. And then sketching in software, Blender is the software program that you use
for the dioramas.
Yeah. Would you say that there's a sketch element to that, or?
Sort of, but like in a flexible sense of the word. It's mainly kind of like a curation. You could call it a sketch because I'm just sort of roughing out the relationships of where things are in space. But then there becomes a much more sort of fine tune of, if we're going to have object A here, how do we create a sort of link to the object in the foreground or however else.
You talked about scanning as well. You're scanning some of like the physical trinkets or sculptures that you create in the studio, but you're also scanning found objects as well. Like I've seen you, when we travel and go out into the world, you're looking for all sorts of different inspiration from like natural ingredients.
Yeah. I'm that weird girl like taking photos of the ground in the parking lot often. Yeah.
And you can do that with your phone, and then you also have like a 3D scanning tool.
Yeah, it looks kind of like a Game Boy, but it gives you these high res mesh files. It's a combination of like LiDAR and photo, but I use a lot of different things, whether it's my iPhone or that. But I'm finding it more and more interesting to mix the two, like create some things totally from scratch and then to have other elements that are ripped from the natural world. So you have a realistic tree with a kind of strange fox that is made out of clay. Or another thing that I've been kind of messing around with is grabbing a bunch of sticks and then building my own trees from these sticks and scanning that, where it's like, is that an authentic tree? Sort of, not really. It's of the natural world, but it's been manipulated. And so yeah, there's a lot of like I think of it mainly as a process of telephone, that I'm just saying something over and over, and every time the deviation unveils something about the sort of core nature of the object that I'm riffing.
I've seen you scan a tree, and so that tree is a physical tree that lives in the world in reality, and it's this really high def 3-dimensional image that's on this scanning software, and you drag that file into Blender, and you might then build a bunch of other, or sculpt a bunch of other like digital trees that are only existent in software. And so you have both natural trees and digital trees, and then you might sculpt a clay animal and then scan that and put that into the trees with other objects.
It's really collage. I mean, it's 3-dimensional collage is the way that I think about it. Instead of sort of like cutting this out of a magazine and this out of a home photo and this out of a newspaper and putting them all together, it's doing that, but then you have this like unified condition, the world, the light, the ground, that allows them to kind of feel like they belong together. That's one of the most interesting parts, is like you realize if there is nothing inherent in the sort of texture or the look and feel of each of these objects, how do we know that they're related? We only know that they're related through the sort of literal spatial distances.
Is there like a sweet spot between an image being, or a world that you build being just enough digital and just enough organic that you aim for?
Well, I'm hoping that the digital facets are not read as digital when they become paintings.
Yeah. That's fair. Okay.
I mean, it's interesting to me how when I'm like building these dioramas and then creating the renders, the eye so quickly understands like, oh, that triangular mesh, that's a glitch. Or if you see a halo around a drawing, oh, that's a cutout. That's where the background is sticking to the drawing or the other object. But when you see it in the paint is already a medium that is about trompe l'oeil and illusion. Anytime you see any image in paint is this like deceptive medium where it's transmuting itself to present as something it is not. And so like that's why I hope that the paint kind of takes it a step away from the digital and takes it into this place of fantasy and magic that we're used to painting taking us to.
Okay, so that said, I guess maybe not, digital is not the right term, but is there a sweet spot of balance between a very like familiar, real looking image with a very phantasmal, otherworldly image? Is there a sweet spot between those two that you're trying to achieve?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not intentionally trying to balance. It's not as if I'm like, okay, we've got 70% fantasy, we need 30% reality to counteract it.
Sure.
To me, the paintings are about an interpretation of space, and when the elements become too prominent or removed from the sort of macro scene, when you have too many individuals instead of team players, that to me is like disruptive in a scene. I mean, that's not necessarily what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to talk about an ecosystem, about how things go together. So the question about like how much realism versus how much fantasy, it's not something I really worry about, because I mean, everything's fantasy. Even when I'm like putting in assets from the real world, there's an element of fantasy in that. Like, you know, these scans of trees, you're catching a tree at a certain time of day, and say that cast of light then makes the scan of the tree turn orange. Like, is that tree actually orange? No, you know, and the tree doesn't appear that way the next time of day, or maybe it falls, maybe it dies. At the end of the day, everything that I'm dealing with in the computer is an avatar. It's a proxy. It's not the actual thing. And because of that, everything is a fantasy. You know, everything is like a ghost of a real object. But it's fascinating to talk about the living world with non-living entities that have never been alive, could never live.
I mean, I get to see your process often. It's very dynamic. There's all these ingredients. There's VR headsets, there's computers, there's messy tables of clay and wax and paper cutouts and like every freaking tool in the book, I feel like, when I walk into the studio. And that to me is like, it is clearly that there's a lot of like play and experimentation going on with that. But the final product that you seek to make, or that you're known for, is a painting. So like, at what point does that experimentation and that world building get you to a point where you're like, and there's the painting, that's the spot that I want to take to canvas?
I don't think about the paintings when I'm making the sculptures. I mean, sometimes there will be a very specific, almost like prompt or mission. But to your question, like, there's a lot of, I'm making a fox. I don't know exactly if it's going to be in this scene or the next scene. I don't know if it's going to be in this painting. But it's more about my level of infatuation with the thing that I'm making. And I need to find ways of like being surprised by the material, falling in love with it, and falling in love with the fox or whatever it is, so much so that in a weird way it does like come to life. You know, it's a very strange thing to be an artist because you develop this intense affection for objects. And I always am asking myself, I'm like, what's really the difference between that and this like superficiality of, you know, the love of object that we see as being a marker of, you know, capitalism or all of this terrible stuff. But play is such an important part because the paintings are this area of refinement and almost like curation of how do you get all of these pieces to sing together. Feels like you're composing, but the play is just goofing around and then you make a strange noise that actually kind of hits. And you have to be able to drop everything to allow your inner child to play. And I think a lot of people have a hard time doing that because it feels really self-indulgent to be like, what did you do today? Oh, well, I made a bear out of pipe cleaners. Like it feels like a frivolous way to spend your day. But I would argue that it's not frivolous.
Having been in music back in the day, also been around filmmakers and between John and Jessica with Team Heaters, who are both filmmakers, and then being around all the artists that I'm around today, like been around a ton of creatives. And I think that's something that has stood out to me as I observe you more than like maybe anybody I've been around is your ability to play and tinker. And also then with that fail in a lot of ways. Like the natural, it's just like so much more on display, I think, than a lot of creative people that I've been around where I witness you playing and tinkering and I've seen those like pipe cleaner sculptures. Where do you think you get that from? Like it's just very poignant and profound. Where did that skill come from, or where did
thank you. I really do think that failure is interesting and good, and I've spent so much of my life being a failure that I feel very comfortable with it. When I encounter failure, I'm like, oh, hello, you again. You know, it doesn't, it's more rare that something works out than something fails. Failure was probably one of the things that was most salient about a lot of my childhood memories. It's like failing at sports, being bad at every sport that I tried, and, you know, wanting to go to Stanford and kind of everyone telling me like, well, you probably won't get in, and then getting into Stanford and being probably one of the dumbest kids of my year, like, you know, trying to get grants and never getting grants. And I think that, you know, there's a perception of success, like it's so easy for some people, or you know, once the market loves you, then it's all fine. But I feel so grateful for all of this failure and this expectation of failure, because if you think you're a failure, you're free. Like you can make anything. And the career that I have now happening at this age, it's so important because I don't know if I would have been ready for it earlier on. I already feel like I've gone through the fire of being in my early 30s, and like I was the, you know, failure. I was the friend that was like squatting in a warehouse and showering at the gym. And I mean, you've heard this whole narrative.
I would wager to bet that most people, when they dip into your studio at this as it exists today, and myself included, show up and there's a sense of awe in that you've got all the ingredients in the world. There's computers, there's like VR stations, sculpture tables, big paintings, big canvases, this huge warehouse that I assume that most people would enter that space and be like, oh, Emma has figured it out. She's solid. She's secure in what she's doing. And everything's going really well for you. What is that assumption missing?
Yeah. I think what it misses is a propensity for risk, like a level of drive. You know, you can look at the situation. Obviously, luck is a huge factor, and community
Timing.
is a huge factor, and there's so many reasons. And it's not a meritocracy why certain people are elevated in this world and why others are not. But I do think that one thing, when you walk into another person's space or you encounter another person's success or something, you don't necessarily see the things that they've had to give up, the things that they've had to risk in order to get that. And whether that's emotional, whether that's like fiscal, I mean, it's challenging running a studio because you're running a business and you have to make decisions that are totally outside of the skill set of making a painting. Seeing a big space or, seeing a lot of assistants or something might indicate something, but it could also indicate, hey, this person put money into this endeavor or this factor instead of this other thing. And there's times when it works out and there's times when it doesn't.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing as a sure path, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
properly.
I think so. Yeah, the things I notice too, because I get to see under the hood a little bit more being your partner, that as the stakes get higher and the projects get bigger, yes, there's more going into it. There's more resources, but the costs go up with those resources as well. So
yeah, there's partnerships, there's collaborations. I mean, you had Joe on and fabrication and these are substantial costs. You have to make calculated risks. You're like, do I need $150,000 of stretcher bars, or is that something I can forego until I build a video game, until I build a whatever, and I'll be able to sell this, but I won't be able to sell that. And these are like unsexy things to air, but these are huge parts of, I think, what sort of separates artists at different levels is like the ability to put on a completely different business hat.
Yeah, because one could argue too, I think, that like, oh, there are some advantages and perks to the level that you've risen to at this point, but I'm sure there are moments where I've heard you talk about them actually, the fondness of being back in the garage or warehouse space where nobody knew about you and you were farting around and a little more carefree.
Yeah, of being alone. I think I really miss that part of like being alone and not being seen and being anonymous.
Yeah.
And not to say that I'm like not, I mean, the art world is so small and
we can't go anywhere in LA. Gosh, everyone's
that's
trying to, the paparazzi trying to grab a picture of Emma Webster.
Usually of you, actually.
Not true.
Aren't you the Friday Heaters guy?
Just for the record, neither of us suffer from any sort of paparazzi chasing after us.
Zero.
You were kind of mentioning like in that digital space is really just collage, you're just capturing, it's not real there, right? It's just still a sketch. So I'm curious, when does it become real? When does it become its like thing taking up space in the world? Is it when you transfer it to painting, or is there something else that's happening, or another way to say like when is it complete?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. That's why I'm like thinking through it, because my hunch or the thing that I want to say is like it never becomes real. That there is a sense of when I'm making these scenes and like say there's a goat jumping around or scaling a mountain, like the goat never scales the mountain. There is no real mountain. The painting, I developed like this intense attachment and fondness for the painting because I think we all forget that like painters literally live like this far from the surface for months, and you remember what you were feeling or what podcast you were listening to, and each painting like has all of these memories for the artist that are coded, that are not just in the imagery, but they never become real to me because it's like I want the worlds or the dioramas to come to life. Like this is kind of this crux of the work, is that there is always this, I'm like waiting for the Pinocchio to stand up and start speaking to me or something, and it doesn't. And that's also what keeps me engaged and what keeps me there, because painting is inevitably about the static. It's about an image. It's not about moving image. But there's this promise of a world that feels like it's a window and like there's this thing out on the other side of it. And so it's frustrating, but I never gets there.
Do you fall in love with these objects? Is it because of the internal narrative about them that you're like placing on them?
Interesting. It's less when I'm making objects and I say that I'm falling in love with them. It's usually like there's something quirky or unexpected. Maybe it's I'm falling in love with myself because I'm having fun. You know, it's like the inner kid. You're getting just sort of giddy. You're getting high off your own supply as you're like, you know, making these little figurines because it triggers something, you know, some sort of sweet, innocent thing. But when I'm way less critical about my sculptures than I am my paintings. It's like sculptures are for having fun, for seeing what comes out. It's almost like it's much more of a interaction with the subconscious. I think I know what a deer looks like, but come to find out as I'm making it, I don't. And like the object becomes much more of a representation of my estrangement from the natural world. And the fact that I don't know what a deer, like that's the interesting thing.
That is interesting.
Not the figurine.
Before you were working in the Oculus, you were kind of just making these dioramas. When did you know you needed to dive into the digital space? And did you know you were trying to play with perception when you kind of entered that world? Or
yeah, there was two facets. There was the sort of practical, I was running into an issue where I wanted to play with scale shift and light in a way that it just wasn't working. I had like 5 flashlights and things. And
like, did she set up lights?
Literally, you know, and then I'd sort of build trees, but everything was dictated by like how big my hand was. And I'm not a very detailed person. So the figurines, the scale was always the same. And so when my friend Wyatt Roy like lent me his Oculus and said, you know, mess with this, those 2 problems went away. And I found with none of this stuff, it's not like I knew what I was doing and then I followed the path. It was like my interests warped as I kept using these tools. And I realized as I was using the Oculus, this is using this like prosthetic eye, you know, this prosthesis that allows you to be outside of yourself and see things that we couldn't see. And so the paintings got so much stranger because it wasn't about like witnessing the landscape in the same body relationship. You have no body, and like losing body just created a lot more opportunities for how you might move through a landscape that we haven't seen in painting, because, you know, the history of landscape painting is just, it's not, you know, dictated by plein air, but it's definitely dictated by like observational studies that then, you know, are cobbled together.
Yeah, I just assume like when you picked up those tools, the ability to harness freedom and be more empowered just got amplified by like 100-fold.
Yeah, but then there's also, you know, the technical issues. You have the days when you're like, oh, damn, why isn't it working?
Yeah,
and
you know. Here, just our little sound snags today.
Yeah, but it's, so I'm not a technical person though. I'm not really like a computer person, which is why I find it very funny that I've kind of like ended up in this line. And I think that that's hopefully a good thing, that like I'm in it because I'm following the thread, not I'm following the tech.
True, I agree. But at the same time, like when I'm around you though, I feel like if we as a couple have a technical issue with a computer, I do feel like you're the one who's more able to solve it than I am.
Really?
Years of experience.
I'm not sure about that.
So, and I think too, I mean, I just see you again. I see you like maneuvering in all of this software and the way you speak about it. And I don't know, I guess I'm just pushing back on this sense of like, oh, I'm not super technical. I would say though, yes, you're an artist and you're a painter, but like there is still this element of like fluency
in certain softwares
with tech. Yeah.
And the more softwares you learn, the more it's easy to pick up a different thing. And so I've been really, now developing this video game and whatever, I'm realizing, oh, okay, I can jump from Blender to Unreal, or I can, and that's been really fun and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the video game.
Mm-hmm.
Just drop that right in there. Tell us more.
Yeah. Well, the video game, the first version of it, I'm debuting in a couple weeks with my show with Petzel. And it's a kind of, it's not a one-to-one experience of the dioramas to the paintings, but it's a world that's cobbled together from a lot of the elements that appear in the works of the show. And you're taken just sort of on a track, and there's facial tracking. So as you turn, the view turns, and I'm using it much more as an educational tool. There's not a lot of interactivity in the first version, but right now I'm talking a lot more about the second version and speaking with developers about, how we can make more sort of custom interactive experience.
Mm-hmm. So many people are curious about the VR experience, but it's oftentimes a hard thing to translate, or to have a bunch of VR headsets at a gallery for people to try on, and hygiene, and people get motion sickness. So
1 in 3 get motion sickness.
1 in 3. Be careful out there, people.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted something that was immersive, but at the same time didn't demand a lot of knowledge. And so, like you said, how do you transport someone into a world without them putting on this device and having to deal with navigation? And we just found that having it on a sort of track was the best way. And we also found with the facial tracking that I'm very sort of skeptical of facial recognition, but this is just as a controller. It doesn't differentiate people or keep any record of, your face or anything. It's not facial scanning. But that was the most seamless way to get people to interact with it. Because one of the issues that, I have when I'm explaining the work is people go, oh, it's technical. Like, I can't get into it, especially the slightly older than us.
Yeah.
There's this sense of stranger danger. I don't want to break it. I don't want to look stupid. I don't know how to do this. And so to have something that is a passive interactive experience is key.
Okay.
Do you find people really latch onto the tech part, and you're kind of like, painting though, like, look at the painting?
Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I understand, because it's
novel.
It's like a magic trick, people want to know how it's made, and they want to understand why the mysterious thing is mysterious. But I feel like it's a little bit of a non-answer, in the sense of, you say like, okay, they're from these digital worlds, but there's still a lot to be kind of deciphered and uncovered. And I don't think that just knowing how they were made, because that's what's so interesting. I mean, that's, to me, is one of the most perplexing and interesting parts of the paintings that I make, is like, sometimes I look at them and I'm just, how, like, where, in the sense of, the lighting is so like convincing. It feels so like it has gravity, like it's somewhere that was visited. It feels so like real and substantial in some ways. Knowing how it was made does not help you define what you're looking at. The emotions of this, like, there's something sort of unsettling and strange about this thing that shouldn't be unsettling at all. It's this just lattice structure of the body. Like, it should be very obvious. And so to me, like, it's with that anxiety that comes up when looking at paintings is also something that's very challenging to pin down, because it doesn't necessarily come about. You don't have to like have a knife in your painting, or you don't have to have black in your painting to create anxiety. Like, anxiety just usually comes from like, what is that, in the not knowing. There's nothing like intimidating or strange or deviant about any of the materials. But that telephone process, like, that's what's interesting to me. Is like,
sure.
what is imbuing all of this mystery? And
Yeah. A bunch of your background from school and training and academics and being in the Bay Area after college, it all sort of smashes together and feels very technical, science, computer, digital, which obviously I think shows up in parts of your process that we've discussed. And in a lot of ways, that world is very absent to the spiritual world or the world beyond. When you and I first met, like, I think my first impression was definitely still focused on, again, the digital process and how you were building these worlds and coming up with these really powerful images. And then over the years, as I've seen you work more and more, perhaps it's just the nature of world building that has some sort of like God concept. But I feel like increasingly there is this sense of like otherworldliness or spirit or something else at play in what you create. And I think that's often, like, spirituality is oftentimes a subject that we walk on eggshells around with in the art world. And I'm curious how that's evolved perhaps over the last several years.
Yeah. No, I love that you're bringing up spirituality in art, because I feel like that's a dirty word or something. And
religion. I guess I should say spirituality and religion. Like, it's easier. I use spirituality first because it's a much more broad, I think, welcoming term. The minute you say religion, it starts to get a little tight.
But people talked about spirituality with modernism, with like a Rothko and a George O'Keeffe. There was a history of like, I would argue, a kind of period deep in Corn where people overtly would kind of talk, Agnes Martin, where people would talk about spirit in work. It's fallen out of fashion, but who knows, maybe it'll come back. It's an interesting thing as someone who is like finding religion, finding a sense of God, coming from like a very atheist household and coming from a very sort of skeptical place. I've been, personally like toying with this idea of what's really the difference between this like creative spark that generates an idea. I think it's Brene Brown has this whole thing about genius, and genius is a spirit that visits everyone.
I like that.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. But I also find, this is a parallel conversation with what's happening with AI and this idea of like spirit or not spirit. Is it just a hive mind, collective intelligence, or is it becoming something? But this is like, to me, the primary conversation of our era is this question of spirit and animation, and when something becomes animated. And I love Michael Pollan, and I was just listening to this podcast. He's promoting his book on consciousness, and in this podcast he was talking about how most, if not all, of indigenous cultures have some form of animism, where all creatures, trees, stones have spirits within them. And it's at some point in culture, it kind of gets knocked out of us, or we think that, the world is, that there is a one God up in the sky, and that, we as people have souls, but animals do not. And I think that what Pollan says, and I swear I'll bring this back around.
Sure.
But what Pollan says, is that when we have these experiences with magic mushrooms or whatever, when our consciousness is unlocked in a way, one of the first things everyone sees is like, oh, the trees are breathing and everything is alive. And there's that real question of like, isn't that the actual state of the world, that everything really is alive around us? In the process of building my practice and researching the natural world, which honestly, I felt very alienated from the natural world. I was not a like camper. I was not someone who spent a lot of time outside. And learning more and more about trees, and that they communicate, and that they in so many ways actually resemble these fictitious trees of like the Lord of the Rings who get up and walk around. But it changes your experience when you're on a freeway and you look out and you think of it as like, that thing is talking to something. That is not an object, a dead thing, but that is a creature. That basically we're amongst creatures. And so to bring this back to this conversation around spirituality, I think once we realize that everything around us is living, and everything is a creature. Things that we didn't think were creatures or we're now realizing are creatures. It's fascinating. Spirituality kind of becomes this like lens through which to think about the ways that we are all animated.
We're taping this a couple weeks before your next big show. First kind of major New York show.
Yeah, I had
Petzel Gallery.
I had a show with Petzel last March, but it was just 2 paintings and they're smaller galleries. So this is the first show I've had with them since we've announced representation, and it's in the big fancy galleries. So it's not technically my first, but it feels like my first big show.
It's not your first rodeo. But yeah,
So
it's like yeah. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, Jess, you were asking, but
Oh yeah, what's the theme for the show?
yeah.
Do you come up with themes for your show? I don't know how art works.
The question about what the show is about is always an interesting one, because I don't set out to try and make the paintings be a certain way. I have to kind of figure it out at the end. So I think that's kind of where I'm at right now, is looking at everything, reflecting on it, and trying to see what makes it different than works in the past. The show title comes from a Walt Whitman poem that starts, "Ruse and leaves themselves alone." And it's a very sort of bovine American show. I'm looking at animals that don't have personalities, animals that get kind of seen as objects, horses, cows, deer, these very like passive creatures that aren't deep, they aren't intelligent. And I think that idea of like when something comes to life, when something's animated, when something has agency, that this is apt to use them at the center of that. But it's an interesting show because I was talking with Dean Kissick, who wrote the press release, and I said something about, oh, well, maybe it's like a movie and each painting is a sort of scene where you've got the climax and you're introducing this character and this is this part of the quest. And Dean was like, well, no, because it feels like there's not an order. And so in that sense, it is like a video game. It is this sense of it's a quest, but it's kind of like you don't know what is coming next or who is guiding you. And
yeah. That feels fair. I mean, having seen you move the paintings around in all sorts of different arrangements at the studio over the last many months, it is just one week it can be like this version of the video game, another week it's a different version.
Yeah. But it's a cold show. Like there's something in the light that's very sort of cold.
Cool.
Hopefully.
It's cool, but it's cool, guys.
Hopefully. It's a very, I would say that like the scenes are sort of in a moment of awareness. Like most of the paintings depict some sort of an animal or a tree, like right as they're recognizing. So there's a kind of confrontation with the viewer happening in the paintings. And I'm excited about them. I mean, they're definitely moody and dark paintings.
It was fun last night. You had a bunch of artists over to the studio for a like fun dinner before things got shipped. And I remember one of the artists was saying that the paintings felt more static, and I'm not sure if it was like a critique, but like more solid and static than some of your previous work where it was like flowy and dynamic. And I thought about it, and it's like, I guess I hadn't thought of them that way, but there is a like oomph to them where they like sit there versus flow. Yeah, Dean also, when he was in the studio, said something interesting about they're so muscular, that these creatures are really mythical and pagan and muscular. And it had me just thinking about sort of like the first version of the gods are always misshapen, and that there's something like chunky and malformed about the first version of the gods before they get like cannibalized and the more sophisticated gods show up. One of the things I was thinking about as I was making the creatures was that someone mentioned that the first capital
was sculpture. That the first money that was ever used was sculpture. So if you were to like buy or sell cows or something, you would make a little idol of a cow and give it to someone. And this is like at the same time that, you know, written language is being developed. Well, sorry, before they had notes or some way of developing a contract, you could literally give an idol of the object to someone. And I think that idea that the sculpture is a proxy and that the sculpture is currency and all of these things.
That's
like
really cool.
The sculpture of a cow for a cow. So I don't know.
I can see that. I like that. Yeah. And so you've worked with Petzel before, but recently, like, did the paperwork, signed the contract. I feel like sometimes we hear in the art world about paperwork and contracts, other people handshake deals, and they really try and avoid that. Is there a reason that you chose to have a formal contract with them? Yeah,
I'm also still working with Periton. Love them, Periton fans.
We love Periton. They're great too.
And I will have a show with Jeffrey Deitch too next year.
We love Jeffrey. Jeffrey.
So shout out to those other galleries as well. But yeah, you know, when I was going through the representation process with Petzel, I just like everything to be in writing, not because I don't trust anyone, but because I think it's an important moment that we all kind of look at the terms and we're like, okay, we're going to do this for, say, 3 to 5 years. But then after 3 to 5 years, I want us to like sit and have a meeting and think, was this good? Was this not good? Or, you know, how can we change things? And, you know, what are other facets? Can you help me cover a sculpture that I would like to do? Or, you know, how many members of my team are included in this travel budget or whatever the thing is.
How about a video game?
Yeah, exactly. And so like, that's why the representation contract is a great way to make it clear what one would like. And, you know, I also understand as an emerging artist, you've got to kind of come up, but it's also nice because it gives you a timeline to renegotiate at another time.
I think too, maybe it's the art world, or maybe it's just this era that we're in now where there's been enough damage and terrible stories that we've heard of over the years. Artists and creatives are more protected or more discerning in the process. But I think there's like a shift of everyone that you talk to, that I witness, and you talk to them about doing a contract, everyone very much admires it, or like, oh yeah, I respect that. Like, I wish I could do that with my gallery. And
I've been really lucky to have predominantly wonderful experiences. And, you know, I had my first big gallery was Periton, and they've just been so good to me and treated me so well. And so, you know, doing a contract with them, I was like, okay, this is just shows me how to do it. You know, if I do it with them, I want to do it with all of my partners.
Petzel is a big space.
Yeah.
Is this maybe the biggest space you've had a show in?
Yes. Oh, definitely. And
is that awesome or also like, holy shit?
I mean, it's intimidating. You know, I've dreamed of having a show at a gallery like Petzel in Chelsea, New York since forever. You know, I went to Yale and I'd go into the city every weekend and I'd see these galleries, the Petzels and Gagosians and Zorners, and you'd walk around and just think like, someday, or am I ever going to get here? And it happened so much faster than I expected, and I'm so grateful for it. But it's also terribly intimidating because I'm like, this is the first big chance and I really don't want it to just fall on my face, you know? And I love the paintings. I mean, I wouldn't show them if I didn't believe in them. But you know, it's New York, like it's different, and I don't know the culture as well out there, despite going to my MFA at Yale. I never really did the New York thing, so I don't have the home court advantage or a huge community of people over there, I don't think. But come say hi if you're in New York. Be my friend.
Kind of, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, of just, you know, again, the stakes getting higher. And when I was talking about people walking into your studio and feeling like you've got it all figured out. And but I know as well, like having observed you this last year, there's a ton of resources and a ton of planning and a ton of bets that you've placed that go into a show. So and it's a big space and
Yeah.
everybody involved. You got to respect the galleries too, that like they have this huge space and they got to pay the rent and pay staff, and they've only got a certain amount of blocks every year to put shows together.
Oh yeah, and they're very discerning
And
when it comes to the freeze blocks, and so I'm really grateful. It's a huge vote of confidence to get it, and you really, when it's your first shot, you really are hoping it goes well.
And you both take risks. I mean, you both as an artist too, it's like you need to continue pushing and evolving. Even though people sometimes still want a certain thing from you that they saw once that they really liked. Yes, you need to speak to that a little bit, but also still keep doing new, exciting stuff that keeps all of our attention going. And galleries have to be a part of that process and help enable it. So you both are taking risk, and it's a beautiful partnership. I think it's something that I like to harp on in this space, that sort of defense of the parts of the industry as I see them that are still very powerful and helpful for all parties involved.
There's pressure with each show to make every show better and better, but this one I really believe in. And so I'm curious, I'm curious if the reception is that, it's outside of my control and whatever, but it'll be interesting to see if the outside matches with the inside, to see if other people like it or not like it, but they get it. They're interested in it. My greatest fear is that I will get in the way of the work. That's something that I say, or that my personality will be annoying or whatever, and it distracts, because at the end of the day, like, the work should live without me. I want someone to be able to go into the show and have an experience and be intrigued, and if I say something wrong and that distorts their experience or takes it away, then that would be a great tragedy. So it's walking that fine line between giving people enough background about how the work's made, what I'm getting from the work, so that they're interested if they need it, but then also to like step back and let them do their own thing. Talking about a painting and what's happening in a painting and why it's interesting, there's actually something kind of vulnerable. You can sound stupid. You can, you're delving into an associative free fall with a stranger, and what you say about a painting is just as much a reflection of you as the painting.
I've heard you speak too on a lot of interviews and panels, and my take is that probably helps too. Like, I enjoy listening to you talk about your work. I think I've experienced others feeling the same, and it just leads me to wonder or assume that helps add to the story and helps, whether it might not be the deal breaker between a painting selling or not, but I think it's definitely yet another thing that's additive to the story.
I think it helps at this stage. I'm in my late 30s and no one knows who I am. And so anytime I can get in front of an audience and tell them my story, my spiel, my whatever, great. But it's going to be a really different thing at 50 and at 60, when there isn't, hopefully, if there's name recognition, the demand to be in front of people might not be the same.
Sure.
And what I can speak about is maybe, instead of giving everyone the intro and what I'm doing, I can like have more nuanced conversations about what I'm interested in, where I'm going. I feel like my work is not intentionally, but just happens to be at this crazy intersection of like environmentalism and tech and, our understanding that the natural world has consciousness that we previously didn't get. And so like there's all of these sort of sub explorations in the work, but I hope there's also these greater implications for the genres of painting that I'm interested in. I mean, one of my things that I'm so fascinated by is like, how do we kind of crack open the genre of still life painting so that it can be more, people have called me like a landscape painter, but I'm also this like still life painter. We have this idea that still lifes is just oranges on a table, or that, we've glasses or something, like a Manet painting in 1890. But the reality is like still life and what we can stage in these different new arenas with all of these crazy new tools. Like it's just the boundaries are dissolving in this fascinating way. And that's the larger thing is like, I'm making a type of painting that's never been made before. Not to like toot my own horn, but I don't mean it like that. I just mean, you could never have made landscape painting as still life in the past. It wouldn't have physically been possible because you couldn't have made 30 trees with that level of detail, staged them around the studio, looked at it, observed it, photographed it. It's a type of painting that is made possible by this technology. And like, I think that as the technology changes, we're going to have so many more types of genres that are possible with to then translate into painting.
Yeah. I'm not trying to get like too much into our personal life on this podcast, but for the record, for those who are listening, like officially, Emma and I met 5 years ago, studio visit, a year later at another studio visit, friendship, long series of events, getting to know each other, started dating, and then we got engaged. So that needs to probably be known for some sort of...
I feel like it's political disclosure or
Yeah,
whatever.
I don't know, like...
We're talking to HR.
Yeah. Emma has had this kind of rocket ship career that's been exciting to be at her side for.
Oh.
Friday Heaters has been this kind of little evolving project on the side. And so I think we both have an affinity for each other's work. And it's really cool to have big time Emma Webster. As I see it, it's really great to have big dog Emma Webster on the show today. Whenever we land a big dog for an interview, it always feels pretty solid.
Thanks, babe.
But,
I'm not sure I felt like a big dog.
But
she kind of has to say yes.
Yes, and she's been very supportive of the Friday Heaters efforts, and our powers are combining today as we approach her big Petzel show in New York. Thought it was a great time to finally get her on the pod.
I listen to the podcast all the time. I don't think you realize that painters are probably your number one listeners because it's the perfect thing, painting and just listening.
What can I sell to painters? That's the question. That's
painters don't have any money.
I know, right? It's not what we're here for.
Market.
Long term. It's a long term problem. We'll figure out how to... Just real quick, give us the deets on the New York show.
So I have a show that opens with Petzel on April 30th in New York, in Chelsea. So anyone and everyone is invited. If you hear this, please come to the opening.
Come on, come all. It's a big space.
6 to 8 on April 30th.
We're trying to slam it. Jess is going to be there. The full, almost the full Heaters team will be in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in person. Well, you and I. John's.
There's only 3 of us.
There's only 3 of us.
Oh, wait, there's 3.
We'll see if John can find a way to New York. Kind of a sad week in LA. I believe, I don't know the artist at all, but I've learned about her. Celeste, from you. But just curious, while we have you here, you knew her and just thought it'd be an opportunity to talk about Celeste. And
no, thank you for bringing that up. Celeste is a big deal to a lot of LA painters.
Okay.
And I got to know her a little bit when I first moved to LA. And I always remember seeing her show that opened at Nino Meyer. And she had this massive painting of a fire of Los Angeles, which now feels kind of like a premonition. And she was serving oysters at the opening. And she was just so intimidated to meet her and talk to her whenever that was. It must be 2018 or something. And
why were you intimidated?
Well, I was intimidated because the paintings were so good. Not because of anything that she was like.
Sure.
And I got to meet her that evening, and she was just so lovely and warm and wild and free, and just, getting to know her throughout the years and being around her, was just such a presence. And I feel like all of the painters who knew her really admired her because she had this wild energy where nothing was off limits, and she made paintings that felt impossible. And it's just tragic. I feel like everyone in LA has been really feeling it. She was so loved. And my heart goes out to her close, dear friends, her family.
Yeah, it's been something. I mean, I was not familiar with her. I didn't know her, but just seeing the community respond, and then getting a chance to look at some of her work in the past. Now just online.
I mean, she's a genius. She was really, and her show's about to open at Deitch here in Los Angeles. So if people are here later this month, I believe it opens.
You're around, like, it's sort of the classic question of who are your favorite painters, but it's more, I think, rather than do that, I'm always curious of, I get to be around you, and we're both around a lot of artists, and I think independent of their work, who are people or peers of yours that you really admire or are excited about how they are navigating the scene?
It's funny because a lot of the people I admire, I don't necessarily know or have a relationship with. And maybe that's because they're shrouded in mystery. Like one of the artists I've been kind of obsessed with recently is Mikael Bormans. Shows with Zorner. Like has these deeply psychological, interesting paintings.
I remember those.
Really so beautifully painted too. So he's someone who kind of lives rent-free in my mind. Like the scene here in LA is so rich, and it's really cool to be friends with all of these wonderful painters because you can ask them technical questions, you can ask them philosophical questions, and everyone's down. Oh, Tala Madani, like I had a great studio visit with her just yesterday, and she was so generous with her time and advice and so warm. And that's a perfect example of someone who I really admire her work, the humor, the kind of cutting edge to it. But I also, every time I encounter her and I'm getting to know her, she has such a warmth, and she's so approachable and lovely. So there's so many people. I mean, we're around a lot of talented painters, and I don't want to just sit here and list off all the names that I could. But there are a lot of really special people here.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, just to affirm that, I think I've seen you two intersect with each other, and there's this like enthusiasm for each other that is there as well. Like, yeah, she's warm and kind and all this stuff, but like I feel like there's excitement that you both have for what each other is doing and how you're navigating.
For her.
Yeah,
I really admire her work. It's a cool thing when you like follow someone's work for a long time and then you finally get to meet them. And
there's and I would again just reiterate that it's the work, but it's also the person, as I've observed between the two of you. Do you think like the LA scene right now, like the market's cooled off a little bit and galleries have closed here and there, and it's just a more sober time, I think, for the art market here and in Los Angeles? I still feel like I wonder, like, a lot of people, there was a lot of influx of galleries and attention into Los Angeles over the last several years, and now it's a little quieter. How do you feel as an artist in Los Angeles now relative to, like, I guess the US or just the international world of like art cities and New York and London and Hong Kong, and like how do you feel about the LA community right now?
I feel like it's sort of stayed consistent. I've been really lucky to feel a certain level of security in my place in the ecosystem, and literally my rent and all that. LA, coming back from the fires this last year, it was really inspiring to see how much artists showed up for one another. Adam Alessi starting all sorts of donations and things like that, and gathering around artists who lost homes and studios. But I don't feel like the art scene has cooled off in LA just because a few galleries have closed down. I mean, LA is cheaper, and in a lot of ways it's kind of like more outfitted for this expansion and contraction than say like New York. And I love how LA, we all retreat to our studios and we work really hard, and then we go out and we show up at people's openings. It's a very I feel like in New York or in these other places, there's a much more constant interaction with the art world and the art market, whereas there's this kind of segmented, like on the clock, off the clock that you see when you have to drive to everything.
Yeah.
So I think LA has really figured out a lot of things to make it more, it's just healthier here. It feels healthier than a lot of places.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can only speak for LA because that's really what I know the most, but it does feel like the community is really strong here. When I observe you and other artists connecting and networking and just sharing the journey together, and then I think for what Heaters does, and maybe being slightly more plugged into like all the different galleries and the people running the galleries or the museums and institutions, like all of us who are around you guys trying to like support and develop careers and be patrons and bring more people into the art world. It just feels like there's a wonderful sense of camaraderie and community that continues to endure regardless of sales. Yeah, go LA. LA continues to be great. Maybe we'll just like run that Randy Newman at the cue it up. Jess, here we go. Emma Webster, thank you for being with us on the Friday Heaters podcast.
Woo! Thanks.
We're big fans. Friday Heaters, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.